Matthew Crowder came to the mountain to bury his name alongside the ghosts of a war he couldn't forget. For 10 years, his only inheritance was silence. But when a letter arrived, bearing the name of a dead brother and a family, he never knew he inherited a battle he didn't choose. They weren't asking for a hero, only a shield. And as he stared at the 4 names that were now his burden, the man who had abandoned the world had to decide if he was willing to go to war one last time to protect a piece of it. The last sound Matthew Crowder expected to hear on his mountain was the clip of hooves and the cry of a name not spoken in years. Matthew. He blinked once, twice, still gripping the rusted axe, half like it was the only thing tethering him to this life. Snow flurried soft across the trail, head half-melted patches glinting on the path. No one ever came up this far. No one even knew how that was the point. But the voice called again, closer this time, and he caught the shape coming into view. A young man on a weary horse, clutching something in his hand like it burned him. Matthew didn't move. Not until the rider dismounted, boots sinking into thawing mud, and stepped forward with something like guilt hanging heavy on his brow. I've been riding for 2 days from Fairville. I was told to find you. Matthew's voice scraped low. Nobody told you, right? The rider flinched, but held out the folded letter anyway. It's from Reverend Burrows, he said. You were the only name left. He didn't want it. Didn't want paper, or people, or the past. But the writer's hands trembled, and something inside Matthew gave way just enough to take it. The seal cracked with a sigh. The ink bled from tears or rain. Maybe both. Matthew read the first line, and his world went still. Rebecca's gone. The children are alone. You're listed as next of kin. He didn't finish the rest. He didn't need to. Just 4 lines. 4 names and 1 sentence that broke through a decade of self-imposed silence like thunder across a valley. The letter fell from his hand. How old? He asked quietly. The writer cleared his throat. A 1074. And the widow, her name's Anna. She married your brother 2 years back, said you were the only one they had. My brother's dead too. The writer nodded. Matthew turned his back to the wind, staring out toward the cliff edge. Trees stretched for miles, endless and grey. I ain't seen him since the war, Matthew murmured. I know the boy said softer now, but the kids. I heard you. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Matthew sighed, not loud, not dramatic, just tired. He jerked his chin toward the cabin. Stables to the right. Put the horse up. You'll ride back tomorrow. I got things to gather. The rider blinked. You're going. Matthew didn't answer. He didn't have to. He left the next morning with only what he needed. Rope bred a tin of coffee and the worn revolver that hadn't been fired since Appomattox. Snow melted in patches across the ridges, making every step treacherous. He took no trail, just instinct and memory, like the woods still owed him something, and he meant to collect. By dusk, the first town blinked into view. He didn't stop. He reached Fairville by the next evening, his boots soaked and back aching. The church stood crooked near the centre, its bell long silenced. Reverend Burrows met him at the steps like he'd been waiting for years. Matthew Crowder, the old man said, voice like gravel. Reverend, I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I. They didn't waste words. The Reverend led him behind the church to a small house too narrow for comfort, too silent for the living. She died a week ago, the Reverend said as they walked. Anna's doing what she can, but the boy don't speak. The middle girl don't sleep, and the youngest cries for her mama near every hour. Matthew's boots slowed at the door. And my brother died in the mine last spring. Anna stayed for the kids. She ain't blood. No, the Reverend said, but she stayed anyway. Matthew stepped inside. The first thing he saw was the girl, dark-haired, thin as a whisper, standing by the hearth with a bowl in her hands too big for her frame. She looked up when he entered, eyes wide but not scared, just empty. Beside her sat a boy, maybe 10 eyes narrowed, like he'd already made up his mind about the world. A little one clung to his knee thumb in her mouth, watching him like a hawk. Then she stepped in from the side room. Anna, taller than he expected, sturdy in build, not soft, not fragile. She carried the weariness of too many nights and too few mornings, but her eyes were steady. "You're Matthew," she said. He nodded. "You honor." "I am." A beat passed. Reverend said, "You're the only kin left," she added. So he said, "They don't know you." He glanced toward the children. "Neither do you." "No," she said. "But Rebecca always said you were the good one even when you left." He winced. She saw it, didn't apologize. "They need stability. I can't raise 3 on my own, and I don't expect to keep my name on anything. But if you came for them, they'll need more than a roof." Matthew didn't speak. The littlest one toddled toward him, then tiny boots scraping the floor. She tugged on the hem of his coat. "You look like my paw," she whispered. Matthew froze. The boy rose fast, grabbing her hand. "Don't bother him, Macy." But Matthew knelt slowly, meeting the girl's eyes. "What's your name, Macy?" "And you." He looked up at the boy. "Thomas," he said, stiff. "And that's June." The middle child didn't speak, just stared, eyes shadowed and sleepless. Anna cleared her throat. "They call me Ma. You don't have to take me, but they can't be split up. Not after losing so much." Matthew stood slowly, hat in hand. "You ride." She nodded. "Then pack what's needed. We leave at dawn." They rode out before sunbreak. Macy fell asleep in the saddle within the first hour, curled against Anna's chest. June stayed near silent, clutching the doll that had lost its face. Thomas didn't speak, but he kept close behind Matthew, as if watching how a mountain man moved could teach him how to survive. They camped under a low ridge that night. Wind pushed hard through the trees, but the fire stayed lit. Anna handed him a tin of warmed beans. "You always live out here." 10 years. "Why?" He shrugged. "War takes things from a man." She didn't ask more. Across the fire, Macy whispered in her sleep. Thomas sat sharpening a stick. June stared at the flames like she could see something no one else did. "You think this will work?" Anna asked quietly. Matthew looked at them. 3 children who weren't his, and a woman who bore no blood tie, and saw the weight pressing against his quiet life. "No," he said then, "but I'll try." Anna nodded. "That's more than most gave us." They didn't say anything else that night. The next days were hard. Macy cried every morning for Rebecca. June refused to eat some days. Thomas kept wandering off with a knife too big for his hand, trying to be useful, trying to be something. But slowly, something shifted. June followed Matthew when he chopped wood, watching without speaking. Macy began humming again, clutching his leg when scared. And Thomas, he started asking questions. "How do you trap rabbits? How deep's the snow get up here? What do bears hate?" The boy, who once barely looked at him now, shadowed his every step. Unattended the cabin with quiet strength, mending, cooking, never complaining. One morning, Matthew found her crying behind the barn, wiping her eyes with the hem of her dress. She didn't know he saw. He didn't say anything. But that night, he left a carved bird on her windowsill. Just wood, but carefully done. She found it before sunrise and didn't speak of it. But she smiled that morning. Then came the knocking. Late one night, 3 short raps. No one knocked up here. Not unless they meant harm. Matthew rose slowly, hand on the revolver he kept near the fire. Anna reached for Macy, pulling her clothes. June shrank behind her. Thomas grabbed the dull hatchet he used to practice. The knock came again. Matthew opened the door. A man stood there, dirty, grinning eyes too bright. "Well, well," he drawled. "Didn't think you'd take them all, especially her." Anna gasped. Matthew's jaw clenched. The past had found them. And it wasn't finished. The man on the porch didn't ask to be let in. He just stepped forward like he belonged. Like the mountain wasn't a place earned, but something owed to him. Matthew didn't move aside, didn't even blink. The doorframe was wide enough for one man, and Matthew filled it. "You're not welcome here," he said quietly. The man laughed. Soft, scratchy, too casual for someone who'd climbed 2 days through snow and stone just to stand there. He looked down at the revolver resting easy in Matthew's hand and clicked his tongue. Didn't say I was looking for a welcome, just came to see how little Anna's doing with her new mountain family. Didn't take you for a sentimental type, Crowder. But then again, no one thought you'd come down for a funeral either. Behind Matthew, Anna stiffened. She didn't speak, didn't step forward, but he could feel the weight of her breath shift tight and pulled thin. "Who is he?" Thomas asked, from behind her voice low. Matthew didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the stranger's. "You've got a name?" he asked, finally. The man grinned wider. "That depends. Anna ever tell you about Daniel Breck? Or did she leave out that part when she wrote her sober story letter to the Reverend?" Matthew's knuckles tightened on the revolver grip. He didn't raise it, not yet. But the air shifted thick, heavy. Even the wind outside paused, as if waiting. Anna spoke then just one word, one name. Daniel. The way she said it, like scraping a wound raw, told Matthew more than she ever had. Daniel tipped his hat mockingly. "See, she remembers." Anna stepped forward now, past the children, past the hearth. Her hand rested lightly on Matthew's back, not pushing, not pulling, just there. "You've got no claim," she said firmly. "Not on me, not on them." Daniel chuckled. "Don't need a claim, sweetheart. Just came to talk. Maybe catch up. Hear there's a mine opening south of here. Good coin for a man willing to work. Thought I'd say my goodbyes before heading off." "Goodbye," Matthew said, flatly. Daniel raised his hands, mocking innocence. "Easy now, mountain man. Ain't here to start trouble. Just thought I'd check on the family. You know the one that used to be mine." And with that, he turned and walked away, slow, deliberate, dragging each step like a knife over gravel. His coat flared once in the wind, and then he vanished into the trees. Matthew didn't lower the revolver for a long time. They didn't sleep that night. Thomas stood watch beside the door hatchet in hand-eyes sharp. June curled against Anna's lap awake, but silent. Macy whimpered until exhaustion took her, and Matthew sat by the window, revolver resting across his knee. "Who was he?" Thomas asked, around midnight, voice rough with something too old for his years. Anna didn't answer, not right away. She held June close and stared into the fire. "He was before your pa," she said quietly. "A mistake I thought I'd left behind. A man who wanted what he couldn't keep. Was he your husband?" "No," she said. "He thought he was." Thomas didn't ask more, but the way his jaw clenched, the way he didn't look away from the dark beyond the window, that said enough. By morning, the snow had returned. Not a storm, just a steady fall, soft and soundless. It painted the trees white and blurred the trail Daniel had taken, as if the mountain itself wanted to erase him. Matthew stood outside, arms crossed, watching the woods, like a man waiting for an ambush that never came. Anna joined him, shawl tight around her shoulders. "He won't come back," she said, though her voice betrayed doubt. Matthew didn't reply. "He's a coward," she added. "Always was." Still, he said nothing. "You believe that, don't you?" Matthew looked at her, then back to the trees. "Cowards come back when they think you've let your guard down." Anna swallowed. "Then we won't," she said. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. Thomas pushed himself harder, chopping wood until his arms shook. June began having nightmares, waking in the night, with cries she never voiced in the day. And Macy grew clingy, refusing to leave Anna's side. Matthew worked the land repaired. The chicken coop mended the fence. Every night he checked the rifle and double-bolted the door, and every morning he looked out over the ridge for any sign of Daniel. None came. One afternoon, Thomas followed him to the edge of the woods. He didn't speak at first, just walked beside him as Matthew carried traps out to reset along the ridgeline. "You ever scared?" the boy asked, finally. Matthew paused, then knelt to set the first trap. "Of what?" "Of coming back." Matthew considered the question, then nodded all the time. "So what do you do?" "Keep watch. Keep working." Thomas frowned. "That it?" Matthew glanced over. You want me to say something pretty? I don't have that. Just truth. You get scared. You work through it. Thomas chewed on that. Did you ever have kids? No? Why'd you come for us then? Matthew looked out over the snow. The valley beyond was blinding white untouched. Because someone had to, he said. Thomas nodded slowly. I'm glad it was you. A week passed. The snow began to melt in patches. The creek roared with thawed ice, and deer tracks began to appear near the edge of the trees. June smiled for the first time when Matthew gave her a carved fox. It wasn't much, just whittle-lead wood, but she held it like treasure. Macy stopped crying every night, started helping Anna with the stew. Thomas chopped his first full stack of wood and beamed when Matthew nodded approval. It was working. It was slow, hard aching, but it was working. And then came the fire. It started in the barn. No lightning, no stove, just flames, sudden and hungry. Matthew woke to the smell of smoke and the roar of panic. He burst out the door with a bucket in hand before the others even stirred. But it was too late. The barn was engulfed, horses screaming hay-popping heat, lashing out like a wild beast. Anna came running, grabbing Macy and June. Thomas stood, frozen eyes wide. Matthew grabbed the boy by the shoulder. Get the pail back of the well now. Thomas moved, but even with the buckets, even with snow packed against the walls, the barn couldn't be saved. They got the animals out, all but one goat. And by dawn, the barn was ash. Anna sat in the snow hare, matted with soot holding Macy tight. June stood in silence, face streaked with smoke. Thomas punched the wall until his knuckles bled, and Matthew stared at the charred ground jaw tight. This wasn't an accident. He knew it like he knew the mountain, like he knew the feel of a loaded gun in his hand. Daniel had come back, and next time, he wouldn't stop at the barn. They buried the goat behind the cabin. Macy cried until she hiccuped. Anna held her while Thomas dug. June placed a stick carved like a cross at the mound. Matthew didn't speak. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead. By nightfall, he had reinforced the door set traps beyond the trees and left warnings carved into bark. Anna found him cleaning the rifle. Are we safe? He looked up. No. Then what do we do? He checked the chamber, loaded 5 bullets, 1 short. We prepare. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat near the window, sharpening his blade. June curled near the firefox in hand. Macy whispered prayers with her eyes shut tight. Anna sat beside Matthew, hands clasped, voice low. I don't know how to make them feel safe again, she said. You don't, he replied. You just stay. That's what they need. And you? I've been waiting to fight for something that mattered. She looked at him then, long quiet. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. Matthew nodded. I know the storm was coming. But this time, they wouldn't run. They'd built something worth keeping. And Matthew Crowder wasn't about to let it burn. The days after the fire passed like waiting for thunder after lightning. Everything was quiet, but too quiet. That sharp, brittle kind of stillness that let you know something was out there, watching, waiting. The mountain held its breath, and so did the people living on it. Matthew never spoke of Daniel Breck, not in front of the children, not even with Anna, when the nights grew long and the fire burned low. But he checked the rifle each morning before the sun had fully risen. He kept traps reset, widened the perimeter of snares, moved the woodpile closer to the cabin so no one had to linger in shadow. Everything he did said what his mouth would not. The man would return. Anna noticed. She began keeping a kettle on at all times, and a lantern lit even when it wasn't needed. She carried a long knife tucked in her apron, not dramatic, just there, not for show, but for survival. Thomas was changing too. His sharp edges had softened in the weeks since Matthew arrived, but the fire hardened him again. The fear had taken root, turned inward. He walked with his shoulders high tense, like a dog watching for something it couldn't quite name. He helped Matthew without being asked, now chopped firewood. Before dawn, asked for extra chores, and when he thought no one was watching, he sat by the window with a hatchet across his lap. June had begun to sleep more, but she still didn't speak unless she had to. The fire had made her skittish again, and she'd taken to drawing on scraps of bark with bits of charcoal. They were odd drawings. A man in a hat, a wolf in the trees, a cabin on fire, and sometimes a large shadowy shape behind a child. Macy was too young to understand the danger in full, but she understood the silence. She clung tighter to Anna. She whispered her prayers a little louder now. At night, she asked questions in the dark. Will the fire come back? Will P scare the man away? And Anna always answered, yes, baby. P will keep us safe. Each time she glanced toward Matthew and caught him watching from the shadows. He never said anything. He just nodded once like he heard her, like he agreed. Then 3 days later, the dog came. They didn't own one, hadn't seen one in weeks. But that morning, Matthew found the carcass by the fence line. Thin, mangy bones like a map of suffering under the skin. But that wasn't what stopped him. It was the note pinned to the dog's flank with a whittle lead stick, a scrap of cloth torn from Anna's old shawl used as parchment, and in smeared charcoal 3 words. Next time inside, Matthew didn't call for Anna. He didn't show the children. He dug a shallow grave with his bare hands, buried the dog, burned the note, and salted the ground around the fence. Then he returned to the cabin and quietly added a second rifle by the door. The next week turned their lives into a slow, deliberate ritual of caution. No one stepped outside alone. Anna never let Macy out of her sight. Matthew taught Thomas how to handle a rifle carefully, patiently. He didn't give him bullets, just the weight of it, the rules, how to hold, how to clean, what it meant to use it. Thomas didn't smile the way most boys would. He just listened, wide-eyed, quiet. June drew more, but her drawings changed. She started sketching their cabin with thicker walls, with stronger doors, and sometimes she drew Matthew bigger than life standing between the house and a shadowy figure with a long hat and sharp teeth. Anna said nothing about the drawings, but she hung one of them by the hearth, and Matthew noticed. That Friday, while splitting wood, Matthew heard something strange. A bell, not a church bell, a small one, tiny, faint. He turned fast hand to the revolver. Nothing. But when he walked the perimeter, he found it hanging from a tree. An old dinner bell, rusted thin, tied to the branch with a child's shoelace. Another message, this one louder. He cut it down and ground it under his boot until it was dust. Then he returned to the cabin and told Anna they'd be sleeping in shifts from now on. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and set a cot by the front door for her in June. 2 nights later, it happened. Not the knock this time. This time, it was the scream. Not human, animal. Matthew jolted from sleep and grabbed the rifle heart thundering in his chest. Thomas met him at the door, already lacing his boots. The boy had slept dressed for 3 days straight. They burst into the yard just in time to see smoke curling up from the henhouse. Inside, nothing but feathers and blood. He scanned the trees, heard rustling, saw nothing. He fired once. The echo rang across the ridge like judgment. When Anna ran out, he didn't explain, just said, "Stay inside." That night, he didn't sleep. He stood watch while Thomas dozed beside him, curled like a pup hatchet, still in hand. And Matthew whispered something no one heard, not even the mountain. By morning, he had made up his mind. "We're going to Fairville," he told Anna over coffee, "all of us." She looked up sharply. "Why need supplies real ammunition, and I want answers. Breck's getting bold. Someone else giving him cover, and I aim to find out who. But it's a 2-day ride, I know." "What if he comes while we're gone?" "He won't." Anna hesitated. "How do you know?" "Because he wants an audience." They rode out that afternoon. Macy rode with Anna, arms around her waist. June sat behind Matthew, silent but alert. Thomas rode a borrowed mule beside them, clutching a pack tight. The mountain stretched long and cold ahead, but for once, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like a mission, like war. They reached Fairville just past dusk the next day. Everything was dim. The general store was closed. The church stood crooked and empty, but lights burned in the saloon. Matthew tied the horses and told Anna to wait at the inn with the children. He walked through the swinging doors alone. The saloon was smoke and shadow. A few drunks, a piano with no player, and one man at the bar with a face too clean for a place this dirty. Matthew sat beside him, didn't order a drink, didn't say a word, just laid a bullet on the counter. The man glanced at it, then at Matthew. "You the one from the ridge?" he asked. Matthew nodded. "Matthew, I heard about you. Heard you took in a widow and some orphans. Heard you used to be Crowder's brother, and heard someone's macking your life hard." Matthew didn't blink. "Where's Shrek?" The man swallowed. "Ain't my place." Matthew leaned closer. "It is now." The barkeep didn't speak, just slid a folded note across the counter. Matthew opened it. A crude map, a circle around a place called Oxbend. 2 days south. Back into the wild. Back into shadow. He stood to leave, but the barkeep grabbed his wrist. "You go down there, you best bring more than words." Matthew didn't smile. "I'll bring fire." Outside, Anna waited with the children, faces worried and half asleep. He didn't explain. He just said, "We ride tomorrow south." "For what?" Anna asked. Matthew looked at her, and for the first time, something in his voice cracked just a little. "Because no one's chasing us off this mountain," he said, "and I don't aim to die with unfinished business." They rode at first light. Macy sang quietly. June didn't speak. Thomas watched the trees with a glare like iron, and Matthew led them, rifle-strapped, tight jaw clenched. The man who had once chosen silence now rode with a family, with a reason, with a reckoning. The trail south to Oxbend wasn't just a path through the woods. It was a descent into every shadow Matthew Crowder had tried to outrun. The land turned mean fast. Low gullies choked with wet leaves, black pines twisted by storms, and an air that pressed cold into bone. No birds, no chatter of animals, just the sound of hooves and the occasional soft cry from Macy when the wind turned too sharp for her cheeks. They rode tight with Anna, and the children bracketed between Matthew and Thomas. The boy didn't complain once, not when the mule slipped on loose shale, not when his hands turned red from gripping the reins. He watched his surroundings like a sentry and copied every move Matthew made. If Matthew leaned in the saddle to scout a bend, so did Thomas. If he slowed to listen, Thomas held his breath. In 2 weeks, the boy had gone from a cautious orphan to a fierce shadow. Matthew saw it and didn't say a word. Words cheapened things like that. Anna stayed steady in the saddle, a quiet strength radiating from her posture alone. Macy clung to her, humming softly beneath the woolen scarf tied over her head. June said nothing, but her gaze rarely drifted from Matthew's back, as if she knew whatever came would meet him first. Oxbend wasn't a town so much as a dying scar. 3 buildings, a church half collapsed, and a watering trough green with algae. Smoke curled from one chimney, the saloon always the saloon, and a battered sign hung by one chain from the front post, squealing with every gust. Matthew reined in first and scanned the area. No movement, just the wind and the stench of something foul hanging near the well. "We stay together," he said. "No one leaves the horses." Anna's hand tightened on Macy. Thomas nodded, already reaching for the hatchet looped at his side. June moved closer to her brother without a word. Matthew dismounted and stepped through the snowmelt toward the saloon. His boots sank with each step, mud sucking at the soles like the land itself didn't want him here. Inside was worse, dark, too dark for midday. The air was thick with pipe smoke and rot. 4 men sat at scattered tables, none of them talking, none of them looking up. Behind the bar stood a woman, tall, thin, and hollow-eyed. She didn't flinch when Matthew entered, just poured a drink and placed it on the counter, as if she'd seen this scene before. "Matthew Crowder," she said flatly. He stopped short. "That's right," Daniel said. "You might come." Matthew approached slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "Where is he?" She nodded toward the back, toward a staircase that creaked with every draft. "He's up there waiting. You live with him." She laughed dry and bitter. "Nobody lives with Daniel. They survive around him." Matthew stepped past the bar and toward the stairs. "He's not alone," she added. "Got 2 boys with him now. Rough ones, meaner than he is. He pays them in liquor and secrets." Matthew paused at the bottom step. You got kids?" She blinked. "No." "Then stay behind the bar." And with that, he climbed. The second floor of the saloon was a long hallway with 3 rooms. The first 2 doors hung open, empty bunks, ratty sheets. The third door was closed, the smell of tobacco and sweat leaking from under the frame. Matthew raised his hand and knocked once. A voice inside, draw, slow and smug. "Told you he'd come." The door creaked open. Daniel Breck leaned against the far wall, shirt, unbuttoned suspenders, hanging a glass of something dark in one hand and a pistol resting casually on the table beside him. His face was still too smooth, too clean, like time hadn't touched him at all. Only the eyes gave him away harder now, sunken wild at the edges. Well, Daniel grinned. "Ain't this a reunion?" Matthew didn't move from the doorway. "You burned my barn," Daniel shrugged. "Allegedly you left a dead dog with a threat carved in it. Maybe you came for what isn't yours." Daniel's grin widened. Now we're getting to it. I came to end this." Daniel sipped from the glass and gestured lazily. "You brought the little wife and kiddies down the mountain for that? Not very neighborly of you, Matthew. What if something were to happen to them while you were up here?" Matthew stepped into the room. Vast, so fast that Daniel's glass shattered against the floor as he reached for his pistol. But it was too late. Matthew's boot slammed the weapon across the room, and his hand closed around Daniel's throat with a force that lifted him an inch off the wall. "You think I'm here to threaten?" Matthew hissed. "I came to deliver." Daniel gasped, eyes wide, heels scraping against the warped floorboards. Matthew didn't squeeze, but he didn't let go. "I walked away from war," he growled. "From brothers dying in ditches, from blood and rivers. I came to that mountain to bury what I couldn't forget." He leaned in closer, voice low as thunder. "But I'll dig it all back up if you make me." Then he dropped him. Daniel crumpled to the floor, coughing, gasping, face red. Matthew knelt beside him. "If I see your shadow anywhere near my family again, I won't bury you." And with that, he stood and left. Outside, the children waited eyes wide. Thomas stepped forward. "Is it over?" "No," Matthew said. "But it's changed." "What now?" "Now we go home." The ride back was faster. No threats, no signs, just wind in the trees, and the growing ache of something shifting beneath the surface. Matthew had tasted something he hadn't felt in years. Rage, not survival, not endurance. Rage, and it frightened him more than he'd admit. That night back at the cabin, after the children were asleep and the fire was low, Anna sat beside him with her mending in her lap. "You didn't kill him," she said quietly. "No." "Why not?" Matthew didn't answer for a long time. "Because I've done enough killing," he said at last. Anna nodded, her hand brushing his, where it rested on the arm of the chair. "He'll come again," she whispered. "I know, and we'll be ready." Matthew looked over at her, her eyes dark but strong, her mouth set not in fear, but in resolve. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box, placed it on the table between them. "What's this?" He opened it. Inside a simple iron ring. "My mother gave this to my father the day they buried their first child," he said. "S said it was to remind them what they still had." Anna stared at it, breath caught. "I'm not good with promises," he said, "but I'll keep this one." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She slipped the ring onto her finger and leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the snow began to fall again. But inside the cabin, something had taken root. Not safety, not peace, but family, and family was worth fighting for. The days that followed were quieter, but not peaceful. The snow eased its grip on the valley, melting into thick mud and flooding the stream bed with runoff. Yet the cold held firm in the shadows. Trees still bore the scars of winter, and the wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls like a secret trying to find its way in. But inside, something had shifted. Subtle at first, then more solid, as the days lengthened. Matthew woke earlier than usual now, not from fear or habit, but something deeper. Responsibility, purpose. He'd once lived by the sun rose when it did, and slept when it fell. But now he often woke before dawn, rising to stoke the fire, or check the traps sometimes, just to sit and watch the snow fade from the ridges with a cup of bitter black coffee warming his hands. Thomas joined him most mornings. The boy never said much. He wasn't one for chatter, but he sat beside Matthew on the log stump shoulders, straight eyes following every movement. If Matthew noticed him flinch at noises in the woods, he never pointed it out. Just let the silence teach him what it could. When they spoke, it was in single words, gestures, half-formed thoughts that only made sense between men who were still learning how to be seen. "Cold's breaking," Matthew said one morning, blowing on his hands. Thomas nodded. Ice cracked on the trough. "Means we start planting soon." The boy didn't reply. Just picked up the old shovel, leaning against the side of the cabin, and started digging where Matthew had marked the rows with stones. He didn't need to be told. Not anymore. Inside, Anna was teaching June to sew. The girl didn't take to words easily, but her hands were quick and her focus sharp. She threaded the needle like she'd been born doing it, fingers, working the cloth in small, even strokes. Anna watched her carefully, but said little, correcting only when needed. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered, once adjusting the thread. "Just steady." June nodded, eyes never leaving her work. Macy played near the hearth, humming a tune she claimed was her mama's favourite. She made little dolls out of corn husks, giving each one a name and a voice, playing both roles with quiet intensity. Every once in a while she'd hand one to Matthew when he came inside, and he'd pretend to tuck it into his coat pocket. She'd giggle, then go back to her creations. Anna watched all of it with a heart half full. The children were beginning to feel like they belonged again, like the world wasn't about to rip them apart. But she also knew it couldn't last. Not as long as Daniel Breck was alive. The first real sign came just after midday. A crow, not the bird itself, but a crude carving of one burned into the bark of the tree near the spring. The wood was fresh, the edges blackened. It hadn't been there that morning. Matthew stood in front of it, jaw tight. Thomas saw it too. The boy didn't ask, just stood beside him, jaw matching the line of his guardian. June brought a drawing to Anna that evening of a man with long arms and a bird perched on his shoulder standing behind a crooked cabin. The lines were dark frantic. Anna didn't scold her, just folded the paper and tucked it into the stove without a word. Matthew watched the smoke twist up from the chimney. Daniel wasn't just testing them anymore. He was circling. They began preparing the cabin in earnest. Not with panic, not even with fear, but methodically, like a family who'd already survived too much to be caught sleeping. Matthew reinforced the door with a second beam and dug a trench around the perimeter for water runoff and traps. Thomas laid tripwires with bells strung from old tin cans, scavenged and cleaned. June helped pack bags with essentials, bandages, hard-tack spare socks, just in case Anna had said, though no one asked what for. Macy built a fort under the table and declared it her castle. She invited her cornhusk dolls to keep watch from the corners. Anna started carrying the rifle, not always in hand, but always nearby. Then came the letter. It arrived the way poison does, quiet and close to home. Tucked inside the chicken coop tied to the neck of a hen with a thread of red yarn. Matthew found it at dawn. The writing was a mess of black ink and smudged fingerprints, but the message was clear. One more warning. Leave the ridge or burn with it. He didn't show it to the children. He burned it like the others. But Anna knew. She saw the way his hand trembled afterward, the way he walked the yard 3 times before breakfast. That night, they sat at the table long after the children had gone to bed. The oil lamp burned low. The fire crackled soft behind them. Anna placed her hand over Matthew's. "I'm not leaving," she said simply. "I know, even if it means." I said I know. She paused, then leaned forward, forehead resting against his. "I didn't come here to survive another man," she whispered. "I came here to live with you." Matthew's jaw clenched. He hadn't cried in years, but something about her voice, the way it shook but didn't break, dug through the armor. He nodded once. "Then we make our stand." It came the next night. Not a scream this time, not a fire, but footsteps many heavy measured. Matthew heard them first just past midnight. He was already dressed, rifle in hand. Anna joined him in seconds, her own weapon slung across her back. She kissed Macy's head, where she lay asleep, brushed June's cheek, and whispered something in Thomas's ear before he stood and reached for the spare hatchet. They didn't speak again. Didn't have to. The night outside was black, not just from clouds or absence of moon, but thick, unnatural, like the shadows themselves had grown teeth. Then the knock came. Not one man, 3. Bang, bang, bang. Matthew opened the window slat, saw them. Daniel at the front, 2 others flanking him. Faces hidden beneath wide hats. Crowder. Daniel's voice was cheery, like he'd come to borrow a cup of sugar. "Thought I'd stop in for a visit. Still got that pretty little widow with you?" Thomas stiffened, fists clenched. Matthew raised the rifle. "You step 1 foot closer and I'll drop you where you stand." Daniel laughed. "Oh, now don't be like that. I brought gifts." One of the men behind him lifted something. A sack, then dumped it. A fox pelt, fresh blood still dripping. June gasped. "That yours?" Daniel sneered. "Girl's little drawing fox thought I'd make it real." Matthew fired, a single shot clean. The man holding the pelt dropped bullet through his shoulder. He screamed, crumpled to the ground. Daniel didn't laugh this time. "Next one's through your heart," Matthew said, voice low. Daniel's smile faltered. His hand hovered near his hip. Anna stepped outside, then rifle aimed. "You've had your fun," she said. "Now go. You think I'm afraid of some woman with a borrowed gun?" She cocked it. "You should be." For a moment, the night held its breath. Then Daniel spat in the snow, grabbed his wounded man by the collar, and backed away. "This ain't over," he growled. "You think you can hide up here forever, Crowder? Family or not, you're still alone." Matthew stepped forward. "I ain't alone." Anna stood beside him, Thomas behind him. June watching from the window, eyes shining. And Macy, sleepy but aware, whispered from behind the door. "Pa's not scared." The men vanished into the trees, but they left behind blood smoke, a silence heavy with unfinished war. Matthew didn't go back to bed. He sat by the door, rifle across his knees, and watched the sun crawl up over the trees. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. By morning, the ground was marked not just with footprints, but with the weight of choices made. Blood darkened the snow near the chicken coop. The trail Daniel and his wounded man took twisted off through the trees, dragged and messy, like they'd been too proud to run, but too hurt to stand tall. Matthew didn't follow it. Not yet. He stood in the doorway, staring at that trail like it was a snake that hadn't yet struck. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. Anna moved quietly between the rooms, checking on the children. Macy slept again, curled beneath the quilt Matthew's mother had once sewn, fingers still tangled in her cornhusk doll's dress. June was awake, sitting upright in the loft with her fox carving gripped in one hand like a shield. Her eyes didn't blink when Matthew looked up at her. She just nodded once, stronger than her silence. And Thomas had kept watch the rest of the night, seated by the back window with his hatchet laid across his knees. He didn't fall asleep, not even for a second. When Matthew passed him to check the rifle by the chimney, the boy only whispered, "If they come back, we don't wait." Matthew didn't correct him, not anymore. There was no boy left in that voice. There was only resolve. Anna joined him near the stove, brushing soot from her skirt. "They won't stop." He didn't need to answer. "I think they'll come again before the end of the week," she continued. "He's humiliated. You shot his man. Humiliated men don't think. They just burn." Matthew nodded. "That's why we finish it first." Her brows drew in. "What are you saying? I know where he goes when he's licking his wounds. That shack near Oxbend, the old forestry post with the lint behind the ridge. It's the only place with warmth and cover for miles." Anna folded her arms. "You want to ride out alone?" "No, I want him gone, but I don't plan to die making that happen, and I won't leave you here." She stared at him long, then spoke softer than before. "You mean to take Thomas?" Matthew turned toward the loft. The boy had heard every word already on his feet. "If he wants to come, Matthew said he can." Anna stepped forward, reached up, cuped Matthew's jaw with both hands. "If you die out there." "I won't." She studied him. Not the way a woman studies a man for comfort, but the way a soldier studies the map before battle. Then she kissed his cheek, turned away, and began packing a satchel with bullets, jerky, and a flask of strong tea. Thomas joined her, wordless, tightening his boots with calloused fingers. June walked over, silent as ever, and handed Matthew a folded drawing. It was a picture of the cabin, still standing, smoke from the chimney. 3 figures on the porch, one tall, one medium, one small, and in the sky, a sun breaking through the clouds. Matthew folded it and tucked it into his coat pocket without a word. They left before midday, Matthew on the geeling, Thomas riding the mule behind him, bundled tight and quiet. Anna stood at the edge of the cabin with her rifle resting on one hip, the barrel pointed down but ready. June and Macy stood on either side, one clutching the other's hand like it was all they had. "You come back?" Anna called. Matthew didn't turn. "I will." Thomas looked back once. Macy lifted her hand in a small wave, whispering something only the trees could hear. The ride south was different this time. No longer cautious. Now it was calculated. Matthew led the way with the ease of a man who'd memorized every stone, every slope. He had learned the land as a place of peace, but he now thought of it like a map of weaknesses, places men could hide, choke points where riders could be ambushed, ridges where snipers could wait. They stopped once to water the horses near a frozen creek. Thomas sat beside him on a log, unwrapping a biscuit. "You ever kill a man before?" the boy asked suddenly. Matthew didn't flinch. "Yes." "Was it hard?" "Yes." Thomas nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. "Will it be hard this time?" Matthew stared at the fire for a long time. "It's always hard. If it's not, something's wrong with you." Thomas chewed slowly. "But you'll still do it." Matthew nodded. "Because it's harder to watch someone you love suffer when you could have stopped it." The boy said nothing after that, but he moved a little closer to the fire and didn't sleep. By the next day, they reached the ridge overlooking the forestry post. It wasn't much, just an old cabin tucked beneath a shelf of stone, mostly shielded from wind and hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. Smoke rose from the chimney. Matthew lowered his field scope. There and there, 2 of them for sure, Daniel and his wounded man. Other might be gone. Thomas shifted. "Do we wait?" Matthew shook his head. "No waiting, let's doubt in." He handed the boy the scoped rifle. "Stay here. This spot's perfect. You've got sight on the front door and the west side window if anyone runs. I shoot." Matthew turned. "No, you fire if they pull a gun." "Not before." Thomas nodded. Matthew crouched low and began circling wide, using the brush for cover. He moved like a ghost, silent patient. He waited at the tree line near the back window. Listened. Voices inside, faint arguing. Daniel and the injured man, something about revenge. Something about taking the girl next. Matthew felt his blood go cold. He waited until the voices paused, then moved fast. Boot met door. The back entrance shattered inward. Gun up, finger ready. The first man inside turned, reaching for his belt. Matthew shot him clean in the thigh. He crumpled, screaming, clutching the wound. Daniel spun from the table pistol, already in hand. "You don't want to do that," Matthew growled. Daniel laughed. "You're too soft for this Crowder. Always were. Why do you think your brother died choking on dust while I'm still breathing? You killed him." Daniel didn't blink. "He owed me money, and he took what was mine. That woman should have been mine. Those kids mine." Matthew's jaw locked. "You got any last words?" Daniel asked, raising the pistol. A shot rang out, not from inside, from the ridge. Daniel stumbled. Blood bloomed on his shoulder. He screamed, spinning. Matthew didn't hesitate. One shot to the leg. Daniel collapsed, swearing, screaming. Matthew approached, boots slow, deliberate. "You just tried to murder a man and kid in their sleep," he said. "You threatened my family. You shot my brother over a debt." Daniel coughed eyes wide now, the arrogance bleeding out with his blood. Matthew aimed again. This time the bullet missed his head by an inch. "Next one ends it," he growled. "Or you start talking. I'll tell you everything. Just don't. Please. You got one chance. Then I turn you over to Fairville's law, and if they don't hang you, I'll come back and finish it myself." Daniel swallowed hard and started to talk. By sundown, it was done. Daniel confessed to the fire, the threats, the harassment. The man he'd brought along, Levy, was the one who pinned the dead dog who'd scouted the cabin and carved the crow. They'd planned to burn the cabin and rescue Anna, make it look like an accident, then lay claim to the land. Thomas joined them soon after, face pale but steady. "I saw everything," he said. He raised his gun first. Matthew nodded. They tied Daniel and his accomplice to a tree with iron shackles taken from the shack floor. Then Matthew rode for Fairville. It took 2 hours. The sheriff met him at the jailhouse grumbling about jurisdiction until Matthew laid Daniel's confession on the desk. When the man read the line about children, his jaw clenched. "I'll take it from here," he said. By the time Matthew and Thomas returned to the ridge, the stars were out. The cabin glowed warm in the dark. Anna stood at the porch rifle resting against the beam lantern in hand. The girls came running. Macy screamed his name. June said nothing, just threw her arms around his waist. Anna kissed him full on the mouth, her hands trembling. "I thought you wouldn't come back," she whispered. "I said I would." Thomas stood beside them, eyes glinting in the lamplight. Anna stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. For a moment the boy stiffened, then melted into it. "You saved us," she whispered. "No," Thomas said. "He did." He looked up at Matthew. "P did." And for the first time since before the war, Matthew Crowder smiled. Spring came like an apology. Not loud or sudden, but soft, just the way this family needed. The snow melted slow and kind, leaving behind wet earth and tiny green blades pushing through the rot. The mountain exhaled. Trees woke. Streams ran clear. Birds returned. So did silence. But this time, it was the good kind. Not the kind that made your bones cold or your heart clench in fear, but the kind you could live in. The kind that gave you space to breathe, to rebuild, to listen to your children laugh without flinching. For the first time in years, Matthew Crowder let himself do just that. The cabin, battered by storms and threats, stood strong. The children's drawing still hung by the hearth. The rifle still sat near the door, but untouched now. Not because it wasn't needed, but because it didn't need to be clutched. Daniel Breck and his partner had been taken down to Fairville. The sheriff wired word that both men had confessed again, this time under oath. Daniel would spend the rest of his life behind iron bars in a mining town farther east. Levy had cried like a child, during questioning begged for forgiveness from people who never even knew his name. They were gone now, but their shadow remained. Not sharp, not looming, just a smudge on the edge of every bright moment. Macy was the first to call Matthew Pa without hesitation. It happened on a morning where the sun rose earlier than usual, pink bleeding across the sky, like a wound healing. She skipped into the kitchen, barefoot hair wild, holding a flower she'd picked from beside the chicken coop. "Pa," she said, beaming, "this is for your coat." He froze, then knelt slowly, taking the crushed wildflower from her small hands and tucking it into the buttonhole near his collar. "You think it'll stay?" he asked. She nodded proudly. "It's strong like you." He didn't speak, just touched her hair gently and let her run off humming. Anna had been watching from the doorway. She didn't say anything either, just smiled at him like she knew he'd been waiting for that moment longer than he'd ever admit. She sang sometimes while cleaning. She started planting herbs near the kitchen window. She even made new curtains, pale blue ones stitched by her and June together. The cabin softened under her care, not losing its strength, but gaining something gentler. The kind of touch only a woman brings when she's finally not just surviving, but choosing. She still wore the iron ring Matthew had given her. Every morning she touched it like a prayer. And when they lay side by side at night, her hand always found his. They didn't need words. They'd already spoken them in the quiet things, building, protecting, choosing. Then one day, a letter arrived, brought by a writer from Fairville, a boy no older than Thomas once was when they first met. He handed Matthew the envelope with nervous fingers. "It's official looking," he mumbled. "Came from the courthouse." Matthew opened it, slowly read the lines twice, then handed it to Anna. She read, then looked up at him. "You're listed as their legal guardian," she whispered. "All three permanently." Matthew nodded. "Paperwork caught up is all." Anna stepped forward, hand on his chest. "You're really their father now." "I always was." He looked toward the children who were out back, digging trenches for potato planting. Thomas had a shirt tied around his head like a bandit. June was laughing, which was rare and precious. Macy waved from the top of a stump, shouting something about worms. Anna leaned in close. "You want to make it official? All of it." Matthew turned to her, brow furrowed. "You're asking me to—" "No," she interrupted gently. "I'm asking you if you want to." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out the same iron ring. It had never left him, just waited. He held it out. "You sure Anna left?" It was the first full laugh he'd heard from her. "Matthew Crowder," she said. "I've lived through war, death, fire, and fools, I'm sure." He slipped the ring on her finger again. And this time, it wasn't just a promise. It was a life. The wedding happened under the tree behind the cabin. Not many guests, just the Reverend from Fairville, the children, and a few neighbours who'd started trickling back to the ridge after hearing the threats were gone. Anna wore the same dress she'd worn the day they first arrived, patched, faded, but clean. Matthew wore his old cavalry coat, brushed and mended. Macy scattered pine cones instead of flowers. June held the fox carving in one hand and Anna's skirt in the other. And Thomas stood by Matthew's side like a second shadow. When the Reverend said, "Husband and wife." Matthew turned to Anna and kissed her, not quickly, not showy, but deeply like a man who'd earned the right. The children cheered. Macy screamed, "That makes us a real family now." Matthew scooped her into his arms. We always were. The cabin filled with warmth after that. Neighbours brought pie. The Reverend stayed for stew. Thomas played a fiddle someone had given him badly, but with heart. The fire burned late. And when night fell, Matthew stepped out onto the porch alone for a moment. The mountains spread wide beneath the stars. No shadows, no threats, just the wind soft now carrying the scent of pine and smoke. He heard footsteps behind him. And she leaned against the beam beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "You ever think we'd have this?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not once," she smiled. "I did." He turned to her, one hand sliding around her waist. "You saw all this before it happened?" "No," she said. "I just hoped hard enough that it might." He leaned in and kissed her temple. Inside, the children laughed. On the stars held steady. Matthew took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I was supposed to die alone," he said quietly. Anna reached for his hand. God had better plans. He nodded. And this time, the silence didn't ache. It sang. Matthew opened it slowly on the porch while Anna shelled peas beside him. It was from the governor's office. One of the local circuit judges had heard about the fire, the threats, the arrest and imprisonment of Daniel Breck, and the fact that Matthew had taken in 3 orphaned children and a widow with no legal claim to him. The letter offered 2 things. First, formal recognition of guardianship and property transfer, land, livestock and holdings, including the small plot near the creek that once belonged to his late brother. Second, a question. Would he consider accepting a community post? The nearest township wanted to establish a rotating civil committee for mountain jurisdiction, resolving disputes, filing claims, settling disagreements before they became gunfights. They wanted Matthew Crowder. He read the letter twice. Anna raised an eyebrow. "They want to make you sheriff." He shook his head. "Worse, they want to make me reasonable." She smirked at you. He folded the letter. I'd rather dig trenches. But later that night, he sat on the porch alone, letter in hand, and considered it. Not because he craved authority, but because the land he loved was changing. People were returning. Settlers with children, miners with families, widows looking for clean water and dry beds. Someone would need to help them settle disputes without fire and fists. Maybe it didn't need to be someone loud. Maybe it just needed someone steady. That weekend, they hosted their first Sunday gathering. Word had spread. No invitations were sent, but they came riders from neighbouring ridges, widows and farmers' men in patched coats, and women with children hanging off their skirts. The cabin yard was full by mid-afternoon. Dishes clanked. Coffee boiled over the fire pit. Someone brought a fiddle. Thomas played it better this time. Anna prepared stew for a dozen. They came in dozens more. She never once looked overwhelmed. Just smiled, handed out bowls, and accepted second helpings from people who hadn't eaten in company in months. Matthew walked among them like a man who still couldn't quite believe he was part of it. He kept one hand on Macy's shoulder most of the day. She clung to him like he was the root holding her to the ground. And maybe he was. One neighbour, an older woman named Hester, took Anna's hand near sunset and said, "That husband of yours looks like the man who could quiet thunder just by looking at it." Anna smiled. "He does quiet thunder. He just waits until it passes." Matthew heard that pretended he didn't. But when he passed Anna a mug of coffee minutes later, their fingers touched, and he looked at her with something fierce and soft all at once. The kind of look only a man who'd lost everything and found more than he deserved could give. Later, after the guests had gone, and the moon cast silver shadows across the clearing, they all sat on the porch together. Matthew, Anna, Thomas, June, and Macy, who had fallen asleep with her head in her mother's lap. No one said anything for a long while. The only sound was the night wind, warm and full of seekers. Then June spoke just one word. Home. Thomas looked at her, then at Matthew. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It is now." Anna looked to Matthew, her eyes gleaming. "You believe it now?" she asked. "That I belong here?" She nodded. He looked at the land, the stars, the family gathered close. "Yes," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "I believe I was meant to." Anna leaned into him. June reached for her brother's hand. Macy snored gently, limbs tangled in her skirt. And Matthew, once a man who lived by silence and distance, closed his eyes, rested his head against the cabin post, and breathed deep. The mountain would still be harsh. The winters would still come. Droughts would dry the creek again. Wolves would prowl the edges of the fields. People would disappoint. Seasons would hurt. But now, for the first time in years, Matthew Crowder wasn't just braced against it all. He was part of something built to last. Not just shelter, not just duty family.